Story number 1. The Screams Beyond Black Hollow Trail. I've spent most of my life surrounded by the Appalachian wilderness. Those mountains have their own kind of silence, the kind that makes you feel watched, even when you're alone. In October of 2018, I was still new to the local search and rescue team. We were called out late one evening after a hiker went missing near a stretch of forest known as Black Hollow Trail, a narrow, twisting path that runs through miles of thick oak and pine. My team lead that night was a man named Carl, the veteran, quiet but confident, the kind of person who made you feel safe just by being there. We left at sunset, the headlights cutting through a low blanket of fog that seemed to thicken the deeper we drove into the valley. The air was cold. The woods were absolutely still. Even before we stepped out of the truck, I noticed something strange. No night sounds, no insects, no frogs, no distant owls, just silence and the faint crunch of dead leaves under our boots. We started down the main trail with flashlights and GPS units. About half a mile in, we heard it, a scream, a man's voice, sharp, desperate, echoing through the trees. Carl stopped in his tracks. "You heard that?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, it sounded like someone yelling for help." We called out, identifying ourselves as search and rescue. No response at first. Then, after a few seconds, the same voice came again, farther away this time, weaker. It didn't sound like panic anymore. It sounded wrong. We followed it. The sound always stayed just ahead of us, close enough to hear clearly, never close enough to see. We tried to track the source, but the terrain was uneven and wet, with the fog limiting visibility to about 20 feet. At one point, we came across something odd. A boot print in the mud, fresh, facing downhill. We marked it and kept going. Then the radio on Carl's vest started crackling with static. We tried contacting base, but all we got were bursts of white noise, like someone breathing on the other end. Minutes later, the scream came again, closer this time, just beyond a ridge to our left. We climbed up through brush and vines, and that's when the forest changed. Everything around us went dark, like the fog itself had swallowed our lights. Our flashlights began to flicker. Carl cursed under his breath, and then another voice joined in. This time, it wasn't screaming. It was mimicking us. Every time Carl shouted, "Hello, this is search and rescue," the forest repeated it back. Same tone, same words, just slightly delayed. Like an echo that wasn't quite right. We froze. I could feel the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Carl aimed his flashlight toward the sound and yelled again. Nothing. Then from somewhere behind us came a whisper. "Help me." We spun around, lights flashing through the mist. No one there, just fog. Carl motioned for us to head back, but the path behind us was gone. I'm not exaggerating. It was gone. The trail we came in on had vanished into a maze of trees that all looked identical. Carl marked a tree with his knife and tried the radio again. Still static. That's when I noticed something moving between the trees. A shadow, tall, thin and shifting, like it was made of the fog itself. It wasn't walking, it was drifting. Carl saw it too. He pulled his flashlight up and shouted, "Sir, stay where you are." The figure stopped. Then it screamed. The exact same scream we'd heard earlier. Same pitch, same length, same voice. Carl grabbed my arm and whispered, "Run!" We ran without looking back. I could hear the thing following us, matching our footsteps, echoing our voices. Every time I tripped, I could hear it laugh. By some miracle, we found a familiar trail marker and made it back to the truck just before dawn. Carl slammed the doors shut, started the engine, and didn't say a single word the entire drive back. When we returned with the full team later that morning, the fog had lifted. They found signs of a camp, torn fabric, a broken flashlight, and a single boot. The same boot we'd seen the night before. The missing hiker was never found. Carl never spoke about that night again. He retired a few months later. As for me, I stayed on the team for another year, but I never went back to Black Hollow. Sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind cuts through the valley, I swear I still hear it, that voice calling from the fog. Help me.
Story number 2. The Cabin Beneath Laurel Ridge. I've spent a lot of time exploring the Appalachian wilderness. It's a place of raw beauty, but also of secrets, deep, hidden, and often best left alone. I was 27 when I first came across what I now refer to as the Cabin Beneath Laurel Ridge. I've told this story a few times, but each time I notice people look at me differently, like they can feel the tension in the woods themselves. It started with a solo research trip. I'd been studying rare fungi in the region for weeks, mapping out areas that were barely touched by humans. My plan was simple. Spend a few nights in the backcountry, collect samples, and return before dusk each day. I was cautious, well-prepared, and confident in my knowledge of these mountains. On the third day, as fog began creeping over the ridge, I noticed an unmarked trail veering off from the main path. It wasn't on any of my maps. Curiosity got the better of me. I checked my GPS. It wasn't recognized. My instincts told me to turn back, but I convinced myself it was a shortcut. The trail led steeply downhill, surrounded by thick hemlocks and oaks, the forest floor damp with fallen leaves. About an hour in, I stumbled across it, a small cabin, old and weathered. The wood was darkened with age and moisture. Smoke curled faintly from a crooked chimney. My first thought was relief, a place to rest, maybe even someone who could guide me back if I was off route. But as I approached, the door creaked open on its own. I froze. There was no one inside, just a narrow living area, a broken table, and a fireplace filled with ashes. On the floor were strange symbols, carved into the wood, covered with a thin layer of dust. I've seen a lot in my time outdoors, but these symbols weren't anything I recognized. They were jagged, almost like they were scratched in panic. I stepped inside. my backpack brushing against the walls. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. The woods play tricks on you. I was about to leave when I heard a voice, soft, almost imperceptible. Don't leave. I froze mid-step. The voice was human, but distorted, like it was coming through layers of mist. I called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" No response. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, hard. I was inside, the only way out blocked. My pulse spiked. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Then I noticed something else. Footprints in the dust leading from the fireplace toward me. Only they weren't mine. They were small, oddly elongated, and they ended directly in front of me, without visible owner. I grabbed my flashlight and swung it around the cabin. Shadows danced against the walls. The symbols on the floor seemed to shift in the beam, twisting slightly when I looked away. Panic rising, I forced the door again. It opened with a sudden push, almost as if the cabin itself had decided to let me leave. I ran out, tripping over roots, my heart hammering. The fog had thickened outside, swallowing the path that I had taken. I realized quickly that I was lost. The main trail was nowhere to be seen. My GPS flickered erratically, showing impossible coordinates. I tried shouting, hoping someone would hear me, but only my own voice returned, distorted and slow, echoing in the fog. Hours passed. I wandered blindly, the woods growing darker, colder, and that's when I heard it again. Faint at first, but then unmistakable. A human scream, but it was layered, like dozens of people screaming at once, though I saw no one. The sound came from everywhere, yet nowhere. I stumbled into a clearing and finally saw faint lights in the distance, not from the cabin, but scattered like lanterns hovering in the fog. I called out. No one answered. The lights flickered and vanished. The forest around me seemed alive, moving subtly, almost breathing. When dawn broke, I somehow made it back to the main trail, exhausted, mud-smeared, and terrified. I returned to my car and drove straight to the nearest town. I told the rangers about the cabin, the symbols, and the voices, but when they checked the area the next week, there was nothing. No cabin, no trail, nothing but undisturbed forest. I tried researching local legends. There are stories of missing hikers, strange cabins, and voices in the fog, but nothing that matches exactly what I experienced. Friends and colleagues questioned my sanity. Some think it was hallucination, sleep deprivation, or stress. I considered that. I really did. But sometimes, on foggy nights, I swear I can hear it again, that faint, pleading whisper. Don't leave. I haven't returned to Laurel Ridge since. I don't intend to. The cabin beneath the ridge, the voices, the footprints, I don't think anyone else will ever see it. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. The fear, the isolation, the certainty that something in those woods doesn't want to be found. Even now, years later, I check the forest maps occasionally. Sometimes I look at that ridge on the GPS, half expecting the coordinates to flicker or vanish. I know it sounds insane, but I swear the forest remembers, and it's still waiting.
Story number 3.
The light between the pines. I've spent more nights alone in the Appalachian woods than I can count. As a wildlife photographer, solitude is part of the job. You get used to the silence, to the way shadows move among the trees. But there's a line, a boundary in the forest that I never crossed until that night. The night of the light between the pines. I had been on assignment, documenting nocturnal animals in Pisgah National Forest. My plan was simple: set up cameras near a creek, track movements, and return to camp before sunrise. I know these woods well. I've hiked every trail in that section. But that night something drew me away from the familiar path. It started around 11 p.m. when I noticed a faint light through the trees. At first, I thought it was a distant cabin or a hiker's lantern, but the light was strange, bluish, pulsing, almost like it was breathing. Curious, I decided to investigate. I left my main trail and moved toward the glow, camera in hand. The air grew colder with every step. Fog started rolling in, thick and wet, clinging to my clothes and gear. My flashlight barely penetrated it, but the pulsing light remained ahead, unwavering. As I approached, I noticed that the trees themselves were odd. The pine trunks were unnaturally straight, perfectly spaced, forming a corridor leading toward the light. The ground was soft with moss, but I noticed depressions, footprints leading deeper into the woods. Not human, I realized too late. They were elongated, flat, and strangely symmetrical. When I reached the source of the light, there was nothing. No fire, no lantern, no device. Just a clearing, blanketed in fog, with the bluish glow emanating from the air itself. I stopped, my breath fogging in the cold night. Something about it was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Then I heard it, soft footsteps, slow, deliberate. I spun around, nothing. The forest was empty, but the light flickered slightly, as if reacting to my movement. My heart started racing. I thought about leaving, but my instincts as a photographer overrode fear. I raised my camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit the clearing for a brief second, and in that second, I saw them. Two figures, thin and tall, standing between the pines. Their faces were obscured by shadow, but I could see their eyes, glowing faintly in the bluish light. They didn't move like humans, their limbs bent at impossible angles, their posture rigid yet fluid. I dropped the camera. The flash had vanished. The figures were closer now. I couldn't hear footsteps, but I could feel their presence. It pressed against me, a weight in the fog. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. I ran. I don't remember the path exactly. I ran blindly through the corridor of pines, twisting, stumbling, until I felt the ground slope downward. I dared a glance behind me. The figures were gone, but the light remained. It pulsed, brighter now, moving slowly through the fog, as if guiding me. Hours later, I found myself back on the main trail. The sun had started to rise, the fog burning off. I retraced my steps, looking for evidence, footprints, disturbed moss, anything. Nothing. No signs of the figures, no trace of the pulsing light, just the quiet forest
as if it had never happened. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, stress, hypothermia, optical illusion. I even checked my camera. The photo I had taken showed only darkness, a blur of fog and trees, nothing else. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, reviewing my wildlife footage, I swear I see faint glimmers, shadows moving between the pines, fleeting flashes of blue light. And on the nights when the fog rolls in thick, I can almost feel them, watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of my senses. I've returned to Pisgah National Forest many times since, but never to that clearing. I mark it vaguely in my mind, somewhere between the creek and the ridge, a place that seems to exist only when the fog is thick, when the world is quiet, and when the forest itself decides to show you something. I don't know what the light is or what those figures were. I can't explain the footprints, the pulse, or the way the air felt heavy, almost alive. But I know one thing. There are corners of the Appalachian wilderness that are not meant for us to see. They are alive in ways we cannot understand. And that night, I saw one of them.